I'm 68 years old, sitting in a home most people would never understand, watching my granddaughter Iris trace her fingers along the curved metal wall of this Quonset hut like she's reading Braille from another century. Snow falls outside the window, the same thick, silent Oregon snow that's been falling here every November since 1978, since I was 22, and owned nothing but the clothes on my back and a future that looked like a long, cold march toward disappearance. The fire in the wood stove crackles, throwing shadows across walls I've polished and patched for 46 years. Iris turns to me, 16 years old, and full of questions I've been avoiding since she was old enough to ask them. "How did you end up here, Grandpa? Why did you stay?" The wind pushes against the hill outside, and I hear the metal groan, the way it's groaned 1,000 times before, not weakness, just age speaking to age. I know every voice this place makes. I've slept through storms that would have killed me anywhere else. I've watched 3 generations learn to walk on this floor. "Let me tell you about the winter of 1978, I say, and her eyes light up the way Ruth's used to when I'd tell her about fixing something Harold built. When I was your age, plus 6 years, give or take, and had exactly nothing except a dead father's memory and 4 months of sleeping under bridges. The story starts in Portland, but the real beginning is here beneath this hill, in a promise I didn't know I was making. November 1978. I was 22 years old and had been homeless for 4 months. My father died in July. A steel plate fell at the mill where he worked, killed him before the ambulance cleared the parking lot. I didn't have money to bury him. Had to borrow from people who charged interest I couldn't pay. When I couldn't make the first payment, they took the apartment keys back. Simple as that. I went from engineering student to street kid in 3 weeks. I dropped out of Oregon State my second year, not because I wanted to, but because Dad got sick and someone needed to work. Turns out the knowledge didn't matter much when you're sleeping under the Burnside Bridge with your degree 2/3 finished and your hands too cold to hold a pencil anyway. I stood in soup kitchen lines with men, 40 years older men, who'd been doing this so long they had favorite spots, favorite days, a whole architecture of survival I was just learning. The city felt too big and too small at the same time. Too big to care about one more kid with no future, too small to hide in when winter started coming down from the mountains like a sentence already written. One night must have been mid-November because the first frost had already hit, and I woke up with ice in my hair. An old man named Walter sat next to me under the bridge. He had a beard like steel wool and eyes that had stopped expecting anything good decades ago. We didn't talk much. Street courtesy meant you didn't ask questions. But he saw me shivering, saw the way I kept checking the sky like I could negotiate with the weather. "You won't make it through December, kid. Not out here." "I know. There's a place, though, out east near Cascade Locks. Old bunker some paranoid engineer built back when everyone thought the Russians were going to drop the bomb. People call it Harold's Folly. Nobody's touched it in years." "Why not?" Walter shrugged his coat, rustling like dead leaves. "Scared, maybe. Or smart. But if you're desperate enough and you look desperate enough, you might try finding the widow. Ruth Brennan. She's in a nursing home out by Mill Creek. Only person who's got the keys." He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. I had nothing to lose except the nothing I already had. I walked out of Portland the next morning 40 miles east with a backpack containing 1 change of clothes, a tin cup, a pocket knife, and a notebook. I'd stopped writing in months ago, because what was there to say? The highway stretched through Douglas fir and pine, and my feet blistered through shoes held together with duct tape. But I kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering Dad's face when they told him the cancer was back, meant remembering the apartment we lost, meant remembering the life I'd planned that evaporated like steam. 2 days of walking. Slept in a culvert the first night, under an abandoned gas station awning the second. Mill Creek appeared on the 3rd day like a postcard from someone else's life. White buildings, clean streets, mountains in the background like set dressing for a play I wasn't invited to. The nursing home sat on a hill, a 2-story white structure with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. I stood at the bottom of the driveway for 10 minutes trying to look less like what I was. Couldn't do much about the torn jacket or the dirt under my nails or the smell of someone who'd been sleeping rough for months, but I ran my fingers through my hair and tucked in my shirt and walked up those steps like I had business being there. The receptionist looked at me the way people look at stray dogs, pity mixed with caution, hand already moving toward the phone. "I'm looking for Ruth Brennan. She's not taking visitors. Please." I walked a long way. Something in my voice must have landed right because she paused, studied me, then picked up the phone and spoke too quietly for me to hear. A minute later she waved me down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and boiled vegetables and time running out in slow motion. Ruth Brennan sat by a window in a common room, no wheelchair, despite what I'd expected, just a cane leaning against her chair. She was 74 years old, but her eyes were sharp and blue as January sky, and when she looked at me I felt X-rayed down to the last honest thing I had left. "You're here about the bunker." Not a question. I nodded. "How do you know my Harold?" "I don't, ma'am. I just heard there was a place out by Cascade Locks and I need somewhere to not freeze to death." She studied me for a long time, long enough that I started planning what to say, when she called security long enough that the silence became its own kind of test. "My husband built that bunker in 1962, spent 9 months and every dollar we'd saved doing it. He said it would last forever, that someone would need it someday. He died in 1975 and I haven't been back since. Too many memories, too much love in those walls to visit alone. I'm sorry for your loss." Or are you just sorry for yourself?" The honesty hit like cold water. "Both, I guess." She smiled, then sad and knowing. "At least you're honest. That's rarer than you'd think." Ruth opened a drawer in the small table beside her chair, pulled out a ring of keys rusted at the edges, and a leather journal cracked with age. She held them for a moment like they weighed more than metal and paper should weigh. "If you promise to keep it alive, not sell it, not wreck it, not abandon it, when something better comes along, you can stay there. Free. No rent. Just respect what Harold built." I couldn't process it. "Why would you trust me?" "Because Harold built it for someone who needed it and you need it. Simple as that." She reached down and I realized for the first time there was a dog lying at her feet. A border collie, black and white, maybe 3 years old, watching me with intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than a dog should see. "But there's one condition. You take Rex." The dog stood tail level, assessing me. "I can't keep him anymore. My health's failing and they don't let dogs stay in the rooms here. He's smart, loyal, and he knows things. You'll understand when you get there." Ruth handed me the keys and the journal, then reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a yellowed envelope, the paper soft with handling. "These are letters Harold wrote me when he was building the bunker. One every week for 9 months. Read them when you're lonely. They'll help you understand him. Understand the place. Understand what it means to build something that lasts." I stood there holding a dead man's keys and love letters and a dog's leash, feeling like I'd stumbled into someone else's story. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Then don't thank me. Just keep your promise." I walked out of that nursing home with Rex trotting beside me, both of us heading towards something neither of us fully understood yet. The dog seemed to know the way before I checked Ruth's hand-drawn map. We walked 15 more miles east, following the Columbia River Gorge as it cut through basalt cliffs older than any human promise, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not hope exactly, but maybe the absence of hopelessness, which when you've been drowning feels almost the same. The hill appeared just before sunset, exactly where Ruth's map said it would be. It didn't look natural. Too symmetrical, too deliberate, grass and dirt piled over something that wanted to stay hidden. I could see where the soil had settled unevenly, where the curve beneath pushed up like a held breath. Rex barked once, sharp and certain, then started digging. I joined him. No shovel, no tools, just my hands and a couple of sticks I found nearby, and the dog's paws churning dirt like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. My hands tore open in the first hour. Nails broke, palms blistered, and the dry November soil mixed with blood until I couldn't tell what was earth and what was me anymore. 2 days I dug, slept on the hillside wrapped in my jacket with Rex pressed against my back for warmth, woke up stiff and sore and kept digging because what else was I going to do? Go back to Portland, go back to bridges and soup lines and the slow certainty of freezing. On the afternoon of the second day, my stick hit metal. The sound rang hollow and promising. I cleared away the last layer of dirt with shaking hands, revealing a curved door maybe 4 feet wide, corrugated metal thick as my thumb, hinges the size of my fist. The lock was rusted, but the key Ruth gave me still turned. Something clicked deep inside the mechanism. The door opened with a scream of metal on metal, releasing air that smelled like rust and time and abandonment. I shined my flashlight into darkness that seemed to swallow the beam. Inside was a space bigger than any room I'd imagined, 30 feet by, 20 ceiling arched, 12 feet overhead. Metal walls ribbed like the inside of some industrial whale. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty. A workbench sat in the far corner. The floor was solid metal, dusty, but intact. Harold Brennan had built a real bunker. Not a fantasy, not a half measure. This was engineered survival. That first night I lay on the cold metal floor with Rex curled against my ribs, and for the first time in 4 months, I had a roof. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comfortable. But it was mine in a way nothing had been mine since Dad died. Midnight. Rex's barking pulled me from shallow sleep, the kind where you're never fully under, because some part of you is always listening for danger. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my knife, the only weapon I had, and clicked on the flashlight with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The beam swept across empty space. No intruders, no collapse. Just Rex digging at the wall near the northeast corner, claws scrabbling against a panel that sounded different from the others when he hit it. I pushed him aside gently, ran my fingers along the seam. The panel was loose, held by friction rather than bolts. I worked it free and found a hidden compartment maybe a foot deep, and inside that compartment was a stack of envelopes tied with a red ribbon that had faded to pink. My hands shook as I untied it. The paper was good stock, expensive, the kind people used when words mattered. I opened the first one. The handwriting was precise, engineer careful, dated March 15, 1962. Ruth, my darling. Today I broke ground on our bunker. The earth here is hard, but the bedrock is solid. By the time you read this, I hope we have a home that can withstand anything. The world feels dangerous right now, missiles in Cuba, and fear in every newspaper, but I'm not building this because I'm afraid. I'm building it because I love you, and I need to know you'll be safe no matter what comes. Forever yours. Harold. I sat in the dark reading a dead man's love letter to his widow, and something inside me cracked open. Not broke. Cracked. Like ice on a river when spring starts coming. I read it twice, then carefully put it back and took out the second one. 47 letters total. I counted them. One for every week from March through November 1962. Harold had written Ruth while he built this place, documenting not just the construction, but the love that drove it. The fear of nuclear war, mixed with the certainty that their marriage was worth protecting against any apocalypse, real or imagined. I sat there on the cold floor with Rex's warm weight against my leg, reading letters from a man I'd never meet, about a woman I barely knew, and I cried. Not because I was sad, though I was. Not because I was grateful, though I was, that too. I cried because for the first time since Dad died, I felt connected to something bigger than survival, something that suggested maybe the world still had room for people who built things out of love instead of fear. The journal Ruth gave me was 200 pages of technical drawings, measurements, sequences for operating systems I didn't even know existed yet. Harold had designed everything with the kind of obsessive detail that only makes sense when you're trying to save the person you love most. Water system, rain collection from the surface filtered down through sand and gravel into a holding tank beneath the floor operated by a series of pulleys and gears that had to be activated in precise sequence or nothing worked. Ventilation pipes running up through the hill disguised as natural vents baffled to prevent gas or smoke from entering with manual controls to adjust airflow based on whether you were sleeping or cooking or just trying to breathe clean air. Heating a wood stove with a double-wall chimney design I'd never seen before meant to capture and recirculate heat while venting smoke safely to the surface. Storage compartments hidden throughout the walls, each one accessed by different combinations of levers and rotating panels, designed so that even if someone found the bunker, they wouldn't find everything Harold had cached. I spent the next week reading that journal cover to cover, cross-referencing the blueprints with the actual systems around me. My engineering background from Oregon State finally meant something. I understood load-bearing calculations, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics. I could read Harold's technical notes and see not just what he'd built, but why he'd built it that way. Every evening I'd try something new. Pull a lever, turn a gear, see what happened. Rex helped in ways I couldn't quite explain. He'd bark when I was about to make a mistake, wag his tail when I got a sequence right, lead me to compartments I hadn't noticed yet. It was like he'd been trained for this, or maybe like Harold's ghost lived in the dog's understanding of the space. The water system fought me for 3 days. The first time I tried to pump water up from the holding tank, I pulled the wrong lever in the sequence, and water exploded out of a relief valve I hadn't known existed, soaking me and Rex both. We stood there dripping and cold, and the dog looked at me with what I swear was disappointment. The second day I got the sequence almost right, but reversed 2 steps and the pump ran dry, making a grinding sound that made my teeth hurt. Harold's notes warned about this. Running the pump without water would strip the gears. I stopped just in time. Third day, I followed the journal step by step, drawing diagrams on the floor with chalk I'd found in a drawer, marking each lever and gear and pulley. Pull the red lever halfway. Rotate the blue gear 3 times clockwise. Push the red lever all the way. Turn the pressure valve counterclockwise until you hear the click. Water flowed into the bucket I'd placed beneath the spout, cold, clear, and tasting faintly of minerals. I drank it like it was the first clean thing I'd had in months, because it was. The wood stove nearly killed me. I'd built fires before, knew the basics of kindling and airflow, but Harold's design was more complex than any stove I'd seen. The first time I loaded it with wood and struck a match, smoke poured back into the bunker because I hadn't opened the damper correctly. Within minutes, the air was unbreathable. I stumbled outside, coughing so hard I thought my lungs would tear, Rex barking and pulling at my jacket like he could drag me to safety. I spent an hour reading Harold's notes on the stove. The damper had 3 positions, not 2, and the chimney had baffles that needed to be set differently depending on outside temperature and wind direction. It wasn't a stove you could just light and forget. It demanded understanding. Second attempt went better. The smoke drew properly and heat began to radiate from the metal sides. Not much, but enough to take the edge off the November cold seeping through the walls. Food was simpler and harder at the same time. I walked 5 miles into town. Cascade Locks proper, a timber and fishing community of maybe 800 people who all seemed to know each other, and none of them knew me. I had $17 left from money I'd earned doing day labor in Portland. Bought bread, canned soup, peanut butter, dried beans. Carried it all back in my backpack while Rex trotted beside me, tongue out happy in a way I envied. The bunker started to feel less like a hiding place and more like a project. Each system I mastered was a small victory against the chaos that had swallowed my life. Water working meant I could wash, could cook, could survive without walking 10 miles round trip for supplies. Heat working meant I wouldn't freeze when real winter came. Food stored meant I had time to figure out the next problem instead of scrambling for the current one. But what Harold taught me went deeper than technical knowledge. Every letter to Ruth, every careful notation in his journal, every redundant system he'd built into this place spoke to something I'd lost when Dad died. The belief that planning mattered, that care and precision and love could create something that outlasted fear. Harold wrote in one letter dated July 1962, "I'm not building a fortress, my darling. I'm building a home that happens to be strong. There's a difference. A fortress keeps the world out. A home keeps love in." I read that sitting by the stove on my 12th night in the bunker, and something crystallized. I wasn't just squatting in an abandoned space, I was inheriting something precious. Ruth had trusted me with her dead husband's final project, his love letter written in metal and stone. The least I could do was honor that. I found paper in one of the storage compartments, yellowed but usable, and a pencil stub. Started writing. Dear Ruth, I've been here almost 2 weeks now. The bunker is teaching me things I didn't know I needed to learn. Not just about water pumps and stoves, but about patience, about precision, about what it means to care for something beyond yourself. Harold was a remarkable man. I can feel him in every bolt he tightened, every measurement he double-checked. Rex is good company, smarter than any dog I've known. We're figuring things out together. Thank you for trusting me with this. I won't let you down. Ethan. I mailed it the next time I walked to town, buying a stamp with coins I'd found in a drawer. Probably Harold's left behind years ago, now serving a purpose he couldn't have anticipated. 3 days later, Ruth wrote back. Her handwriting was shaky but determined. Dear Ethan, your letter made me cry, and I don't cry easy anymore. Harold would be pleased to know someone's learning from what he built. Keep reading the letters. There are things in them I never told anyone, things Harold wanted me to know, but maybe they're meant for you too now. The bunker isn't just a building. It's a promise to survive. Yes, but also to keep living with purpose even when the world tries to grind you down. You're keeping that promise alive. Take care of Rex. He'll take care of you. Ruth. I taped her letter to the wall above the workbench next to one of Harold's blueprints. Started a collection of things that mattered, things that connected me to people who'd cared about something beyond themselves. The last letter in Harold's stack was dated November 20th, 1962. I saved it for a cold night 3 weeks into my stay when the wind outside made the metal walls sing, and I needed to hear from someone who understood what it meant to build against uncertainty. Ruth, my love. The bunker is finished. Tomorrow I'll bring you here and show you everything: the water system, the storage, the stove that will keep you warm through any winter. But there's one more thing I haven't told you about, one final gift. If someone comes here after I'm gone, after we're both gone, someone who truly needs this place and has the courage to stay, tell them to dig where the stones are stacked. The land provides for those who don't give up. This bunker isn't about the bombs that might fall. It's about building something that lasts beyond fear, beyond our own lives. It's about faith that the future will have people in it worth saving. I love you more than words on paper can say. Forever, Harold. I read it twice, then looked around the bunker with new eyes. Where the stones are stacked. I'd seen stones outside when I was digging a small cairn near the northwest corner of the hill that I'd assumed was just random geology. But Harold didn't do random. Rex watched me from his spot by the stove, tail thumping once against the floor like he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'd start looking. Tonight I'd just sit here in the warm circle of firelight in a home a stranger built for his wife 46 years ago, in a promise I was just beginning to understand I'd made. The metal walls creaked as they contracted in the dropping temperature. Outside, the first real snow of winter was starting to fall. Inside, I had water heat and a reason to wake up in the morning that wasn't just survival. I was 22 years old, homeless, and learning what it meant to belong to something bigger than myself. Ruth came to visit on a Tuesday in early December, driven by her neighbor Garrett Sullivan, a retired farmer in his 70s who handled the winding road from Mill Creek to Cascade Locks with the cautious precision of someone who'd seen too many winter accidents. She walked with a cane, but didn't lean on it the way some people do. She wielded it like punctuation, tapping the frozen ground for emphasis as she approached the bunker entrance I'd cleared and reinforced with salvaged timber. Her first words when she stepped inside weren't what I expected. "You cleaned." "Yes, ma'am." Harold would have liked that. He couldn't stand clutter. She lowered herself onto the crate I'd fashioned into a chair, surveying the space with eyes that saw past the present into memory. Rex trotted over and laid his head on her knee tail, sweeping the floor in slow arcs. She stroked his ears absently, her gaze landing on the letters I'd taped to the wall. The blueprint I'd been studying, the neat stack of firewood I'd split and arranged by size. "Tell me what you've learned." "Water systems operational. Stove works most days. I'm still figuring out the ventilation baffles, wind direction changes the draw. And the letters, I've read them all twice. Some of them 3 times. Which one stayed with you, the last one, where he talks about digging where stones are stacked?" Ruth's expression shifted, something private passing behind her eyes. She reached into the canvas bag she'd brought and pulled out a wooden toolbox, brass hinges tarnished green with age, Harold's initials burned into the lid. "He'd want you to have this." Inside were tools I recognized from engineering textbooks but had never actually held: precision calipers, a micrometer, small wrenches in sizes that suggested work on delicate mechanisms rather than rough construction. Nested in a bed of oiled cloth was something else, a gold ring, simple band, no stones, just metal worn smooth by years of being touched. "That's not Ruth's wedding ring. I'd seen hers on her left hand when she gave me the bunker keys. Harold bought it in 1974. Our 25th anniversary was coming up and he wanted to upgrade mine, give me something that matched the life we'd built together instead of the promise we'd started with." But his heart gave out 3 months before the date. Her voice stayed level, but her hand shook slightly as she placed the ring back in its nest. "I told you to keep your promise. Part of that promise, when you're ready, is passing things forward." Harold understood that homes aren't really owned, they're kept. "One day you'll give this to someone you love, and you'll remember that love builds stronger than fear ever could." I wasn't ready for that conversation. 23 years old, living in a buried metal tube, barely managing to keep myself fed, the idea of loving someone seemed like planning for rain on Mars. Ruth must have seen it in my face because she smiled, sad and knowing. "You think you're just surviving. That's where it starts. But watch. This place will teach you what Harold learned, that taking care of something beyond yourself is what turns existence into life." Before Garrett came back to collect her, Ruth walked the perimeter of the bunker, touching walls and shelves like she was saying goodbye to someone who could still feel it. She paused at the spot where I'd found the hidden letters, where the panel was now permanently ajar. "Did Rex help you find those?" "Yes, ma'am. First night here, actually. Dug right to them like he knew." She nodded, unsurprised. "Harold trained him before he died. Taught him to find hidden things, to alert on danger, to stay close during storms. Dogs understand loyalty better than most people." When she left, the bunker felt different. Less like a shelter I was borrowing and more like a responsibility I'd accepted. The stones Harold mentioned haunted me for 3 days before I started digging. They sat in a cairn, maybe 15 feet from the bunker's northwest corner. 6 smooth river rocks, stacked deliberately, not quite tall enough to be a monument, but too intentional to be accidental. Snow had drifted around them, but the top rock stayed visible, dark against white. Rex sat watching me clear away snow and frozen dirt, his breath making clouds in the December air. When I moved the top stone, the rest tumbled, revealing what I should have guessed was there: another panel, this one set into the ground itself, metal covered by decades of soil and grass roots. The hinges screamed when I pried it up. Below was a staircase, stone this time instead of wood, descending at a steep angle into darkness that my flashlight barely dented. The walls were natural rock, but someone had chiseled handholds at regular intervals, and the steps showed chisel marks where they'd been leveled. Harold hadn't just found a cave, he'd improved it. Rex barked once, sharp and certain, then started down. I followed because the dog had better instincts than I did about what was safe and what wasn't. The temperature dropped as we descended 50 steps by my count, until the stairs ended in a tunnel maybe 4 feet wide, ceiling just tall enough to walk upright if I ducked my head slightly. White arrows painted on the walls pointed forward. Harold's work marking the safe path. The tunnel twisted and branched, but I followed the arrows like a man following instructions from a future he couldn't see yet. Water dripped somewhere ahead, steady as a heartbeat. The chamber opened without warning. One moment I was in a tunnel, the next. I was standing in a space 20 feet across, ceiling arching high enough that my flashlight beam diffused before reaching the top. Stalactites hung like frozen waterfalls, and in the center of the chamber a spring bubbled up from a crack in the rock, feeding a pool maybe 6 feet across before draining away through another fissure. I knelt and drank. The water tasted like stone and thyme and something pure that Portland's chlorinated supply had never offered. Then I saw the marker. Someone had set a flat slab of granite upright beside the pool, and carved into it with painstaking care were words I had to read 3 times before they stopped blurring. For Ruth, water is life. Love is eternal. H.B. 1963. To whoever finds this, the land provides for those who don't give up. Harold had carved this by hand, probably over weeks or months, probably by lamplight, in conditions that made every letter an act of devotion. This chamber wasn't just a water source. It was a shrine to his marriage, a declaration that love mattered more than survival alone ever could. I sat on the stone floor with my hand on the marker and understood something Ruth had been trying to tell me. Harold didn't build the bunker because he was afraid of nuclear war. He built it because he loved his wife so completely that the idea of her being unprotected in a dangerous world was intolerable. The bombs were just the excuse. The love was the reason. Rex pressed against my side, warm and solid, and we stayed there in the silence until my legs cramped from sitting. Above ground, the town of Cascade Locks watched me with the particular wariness rural communities reserve for outsiders who don't leave when they're supposed to. I walked into town twice a week for supplies, always the same route, always keeping my head down, always aware of the conversations that paused when I passed. The hardware store sat on Main Street, a brick building older than my father would have been if he'd lived. Whitmore Hardware, faded letters on a wooden sign that creaked in the wind. Inside smelled like sawdust and oil and the peculiar mustiness of merchandise that moved slowly. Cordelia Whitmore stood behind the counter, 62 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and hands that showed decades of hard work. She didn't smile when I walked in, just watched me approach the way you'd watch a stray dog ready to help or chase it off depending on what happened next. I need nails. And wire if you have it. What kind of wire? Whatever's cheapest. I've got $3. She studied me for a long moment, taking in the worn jacket, the hands with healing blisters, the boots held together with hope and duct tape. You're the one staying in Harold's bunker. Yes, ma'am. Ruth Brennan's a good woman. If she trusts you, that counts for something. She pulled down a box of nails and a coil of galvanized wire, wrote numbers on a pad, crossed them out, wrote different numbers. Call it $2. And you can work off the rest if you want. Store needs the back room painted. I don't take charity. It's not charity, it's business. I need the work done, you need supplies. We help each other and nobody owes anybody anything except honest effort. The painting took 3 weeks every afternoon when the light was good enough to see what I was doing. Cordelia didn't hover or check my work obsessively, just left me to it, with the understanding that a job worth doing was worth doing right. She paid me in supplies and meals, sandwiches she brought from home, coffee that tasted like someone gave a damn about the beans they chose. One afternoon, while I was cutting in around the window frames, she spoke from the doorway without preamble. People in town think you're wasting your time. That bunker's going to collapse or flood, or you'll give up when real winter hits. What do you think? I think Harold Brennan was the best engineer in 3 counties, and if he built something to last, it'll last. Question is whether you will. I'm not planning to leave. Plans change when the temperature drops below 0. Then I guess we'll see. She nodded, satisfied with something she'd been testing. Harold helped my husband fix our generator in 1973. Wouldn't take payment, just said community helps community. I figure I owe him that much, which means I owe you now. But remember this, someday you'll be the one helping somebody else. That's how it works. The improvement project started in January and didn't stop until the snow melted. Harold had built solidly, But 17 years had found every weakness: seals that had degraded insulation, that had compressed small cracks where moisture infiltrated. I spent mornings reading his notes, afternoons implementing them, evenings writing letters to Ruth documenting what I'd learned. The roof needed the most work. Snow accumulated in drifts that stressed the metal panels, and I could feel the whole structure flex when wind hit from the east. I scavenged fiberglass from an abandoned barn 3 miles away, carried it back in loads I could manage, stuffed it between the outer metal and inner walls wherever I could fit it. Crude but effective interior temperature climbed by degrees. I measured obsessively on a thermometer I'd found in one of Harold's compartments. The rain collection system fought me harder. Gutters Harold had installed were clogged with 16 years of pine needles and decomposed leaves, and the filter screens had corroded through in spots. I spent 2 days on a ladder I'd borrowed from Cordelia, cleaning each section by hand, replacing screens with material I'd salvaged from old window screens. When the first January rain came, the collection tank filled properly for the first time in years. The wood stove became my education in humility. I thought I understood it, thought I'd mastered Harold's design, right up until the moment the weld joint cracked on a night when the temperature outside dropped to 15 degrees. It happened fast. One moment I was banking the fire for the night, the next moment smoke was pouring back through a crack I couldn't see, filling the bunker with gray-black clouds that turned the air into something my lungs rejected violently. I couldn't find the door, couldn't see the walls, couldn't breathe without coughing so hard my ribs felt like they were breaking. Rex's barking cut through the chaos, high and urgent, and coming from a direction I stumbled toward blindly. His teeth caught my jacket sleeve and pulled, and I followed because I had no other plan, no other hope, just the dog's certainty that this way led to air. The door was where it always was, but panic had spun me around. Rex dragged me through it, and I fell into snow that burned my face with cold, gasping air that hurt going down, but meant I wasn't dying yet. The dog stayed pressed against me while I coughed up black phlegm and tried to remember how to breathe without my lungs seizing. The bunker door stood open, smoke pouring out like the place was on fire inside, though it wasn't just a failed seal releasing fumes that should have gone up the chimney. "I owe you, boy." Rex licked my face, his tongue warm against skin that felt like it might never be warm again. Dawn came cold and clear. I went back inside once the smoke had cleared, found the crack in the stove's weld joint, and spent the entire day with Harold's welding notes trying to understand how to fix it properly instead of just patching it enough to fail again later. The answer required skills I didn't have and equipment I couldn't afford. Cordelia let me use her torch and taught me the basics of welding in her workshop behind the store patient, with my mistakes firm about safety, never once suggesting I should give up and buy a new stove instead. Metal wants to flow, not fight. You're trying to force it instead of persuading it. How do you persuade metal heat? It right, move steady, trust the process. The repair took 6 hours spread across 2 days. When I finally got it right, the bead was ugly but solid, and when I reassembled the stove and lit the first test fire, the smoke drew clean up the chimney like it was supposed to. My hands were different by then. Calloused, thick enough that I could handle hot metal without flinching, scarred in patterns that told stories I didn't need to explain to anyone. My body had changed too. Shoulders broader from hauling wood and water. Stomach flat from meals that were fuel instead of comfort, skin weathered from working outside in conditions that didn't care whether I was ready or not. But the changes that mattered weren't physical. I'd started measuring time differently, not by days or weeks, but by problem-solved systems, mastered small victories that added up to something larger than their parts. The bunker wasn't just shelter anymore. It was becoming home in a way I hadn't experienced since before Dad got sick. I wrote to Ruth every week, mirroring Harold's rhythm, though my letters were rougher, less eloquent, more honest about the failures alongside the successes. Dear Ruth, the stove nearly killed me this week. Rex saved my life. I'm learning that pride is expensive and help is underrated. Harold knew what he was doing when he trained this dog. I think about your husband a lot. Not just what he built, but why. The way love can make you careful with details that won't matter until they matter desperately. That's what I'm trying to do here. Be careful because this place deserves it. Thank you for trusting me with his work. Ethan. Her responses came back promptly, written in handwriting that shook more with each letter but never lost its clarity. Dear Ethan, Harold nearly killed himself a dozen times building that bunker. Fell off the roof. Once got buried in a trench collapse, burned his hands so badly I thought he'd lose function in 3 fingers. He kept going because he believed the finished thing would be worth the cost. You're proving him right. Every repair you make, every system you master, you're keeping his promise alive. That matters more than you know. Stay safe. Make smart choices. Ask for help when you need it. When Ruth Spring arrived tentatively in May, snow retreating up the hillsides, grass showing green in patches that grew larger each day. I'd been at the bunker 6 months, long enough that the town had stopped speculating about when I'd leave and started wondering what I'd do next. Ruth came again, this time walking slower, leaning harder on the cane, Garrett hovering close like he expected her to fall any moment. She stood in the bunker doorway longer than she had in December, taking in changes that must have looked like time running backward, the place clean and organized and functional the way it had been when Harold finished it. It looks right. Thank you. No, I mean it looks the way it's supposed to look. Like someone lives here who gives a damn. She moved to the chair I'd built from salvaged lumber, better than the crate, with a back and arms and a seat I'd sanded smooth. Lowered herself carefully and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing the way people breathe when they're trying to control pain they don't want to discuss. You okay? Fine. Just old. But she wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Her color was wrong, grayish under the powder she'd applied carefully that morning. Her hands trembled in ways that had nothing to do with age alone. Ruth opened her eyes and looked directly at me. I need you to do something. Anything. Go down to the spring chamber. Northwest corner like before, but this time look for a loose board in the floor right where the wall meets the stone. Harold left one more thing, and I think it's time you found it. Why now? Because I won't be here much longer to tell you about it, and some things shouldn't wait until after people die. The words landed cold in my chest. Ruth, don't. I've known for months. Heart's giving out same as Harold's did. Doctors give me 6 months if I'm lucky, maybe a year if I'm stubborn enough. I'm telling you so. You'll understand why certain things matter now instead of later. She stood up slower than she'd sat down and touched the wall where I'd hung Harold's blueprint. This place wasn't meant to die with us. It was meant to pass forward. You're that forward now. Accept it. After she left, I sat for an hour trying to process what she'd told me, trying not to think about losing the one person who'd believed I was worth believing in. Then I went underground. The spring chamber looked the same as it had every time I'd visited over the past months. I came weekly to fill jugs with fresh water, to sit by the pool and think, to read the inscription Harold had carved and remember what devotion looked like. But I'd never examined the floor carefully, never looked for what Ruth said would be there. Northwest corner where stone wall met earthen floor. I ran my hands along the junction, feeling for inconsistencies. Rex sniffed the ground methodically, systematic as any search dog, and pawed at a spot 3 feet from the wall. The board was hidden under a thin layer of dirt and small rocks, flush enough that you'd never notice it unless you were looking. I pried it up with my knife. Underneath was a metal box wrapped in canvas that had gone stiff with age and moisture. I carried it to the surface, Rex following close, and set it on the workbench before I had the courage to open it. Inside, packed carefully, $3,000 in bills from 1975, rubber-banded in stacks of hundreds. A photograph of Harold and Ruth on their wedding day, both of them impossibly young, smiling like the future was guaranteed. Another photo of them standing in front of the unfinished bunker, Harold's arm around Ruth's waist, both of them squinting into sunlight. And underneath it all, an envelope addressed in Harold's handwriting, to the keeper. My hands shook opening it. The letter inside was 2 pages written in the same careful script I'd come to know from his correspondence with Ruth. To the keeper. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Ruth has found someone worthy to care for what I built. That means you've proven yourself already, not through strength or money or education, but through the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. Most people run from hard things. You stayed. That's rare enough to be precious. This money represents everything Ruth and I saved over 25 years of marriage. She knows about it and agrees it should go to you. Not because we're wealthy, we're not, but because this place needs someone willing to finish what I started. Use it to make the bunker into something more than survival. Add what it needs. Improve what I got wrong. Share it if others need shelter. But remember this, a home isn't built from walls and systems alone. It's built from the decision to care for something beyond yourself, to create warmth instead of just avoiding cold. You're the keeper now. Guard this place. Pass it forward when your time comes. That's the promise, not ownership, but stewardship, not possession, but protection. With respect and hope. Harold Brennan, March 1975. I sat holding $3,1975 worth, maybe $10,000 in 1979 money, and a commission from a dead man to continue his work. The weight of it felt impossible and exactly right at the same time. Rex laid his head on my knee, patient and present, and I understood why Harold had trained him so carefully. The dog wasn't just a companion. He was a bridge between past and present, between Harold's intention and my implementation. That night I made a list by lamplight, planning what the money could buy: solar panels, crude technology in 1979, but getting better. Proper insulation for the roof and walls, metal tanks for expanded water storage, tools I needed but couldn't afford, seeds for a real garden instead of the struggling vegetables I'd managed to coax from poor soil. But first I wrote to Ruth. Dear Ruth, I found what Harold left. I don't know what to say except thank you seems too small for what you and he have given me. Not just money or a place to live, but purpose, direction, a reason to wake up that's bigger than just not dying. I promise I'll use it the way Harold intended. I promise I'll keep this place alive. I promise that when my time comes to pass it forward, I'll find someone worthy the way you found me. You and Harold saved my life. I won't forget that. With gratitude beyond words, Ethan. Her response came 5 days later. The envelope thinner than usual, the handwriting shakier. Dear Ethan, you don't owe us gratitude. You owe the future, the person who'll need this place the way you needed it, the person who'll come after you, carrying their own version of desperation and hope. Harold and I just built the vessel. You're proving it can sail. Keep going. Make it beautiful. Ruth. By June, the bunker had transformed. Solar panels I'd installed on the hill's south slope provided enough electricity for lights and a small refrigerator I'd bought secondhand. New insulation made the space comfortable, even when spring temperatures swung 40 degrees between night and day. The expanded water system could store 200 gallons instead of 50. The garden I'd planted in cleared ground east of the bunker produced lettuce and radishes and peas that tasted like accomplishment. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that could sustain me indefinitely, something that honored Harold's vision while adapting it to realities he hadn't anticipated. The town's attitude shifted incrementally. People still watched me with caution, but it was mixed now with something closer to curiosity. The kid who'd shown up homeless in November had made it through winter, had improved. The legendary bunker had turned Harold Brennan's Cold War folly into something functional. Cordelia hired me to do odd jobs around the store, paying in cash and supplies, and the kind of respect that comes from watching someone refuse to quit when quitting would have been reasonable. You've got a future here if you want it. I want it. Then you'd better figure out what that future looks like beyond just surviving in a hole in the ground. I'm working on it. Work faster. Winter comes every year and it doesn't care how well prepared you think you are. But I was prepared now in ways that went beyond stockpiled food and reinforced walls. I'd learned Harold's systems thoroughly enough to teach them to someone else. I'd proven I could handle solitude without going crazy cold, without giving up fear, without running. The bunker wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was home in the deepest sense, the place where I belonged because I'd earned belonging through sweat and stubbornness and the refusal to accept that homelessness at 22 meant hopelessness forever. Rex and I sat outside one evening in late May, watching the sun set over hills that had stopped feeling foreign. The dog was aging gracefully, his muzzle just beginning to show the first hints of gray, but his loyalty and instincts remained sharp as ever. "You know what we did, boy? We kept a promise to people we never met. We honored something bigger than ourselves." He wagged his tail, once satisfied with that assessment, or just happy to be sitting in warm grass instead of winter snow. I thought about Harold carving Ruth's name into stone by lamplight, about Ruth trusting a homeless kid with her dead husband's life work, about the chain of care that connected 1962 to 1979, Cold War paranoia to personal survival, one man's love to another man's redemption. The land provides for those who don't give up. Harold had carved that into stone because he believed it deeply enough to make it true. I was living proof he'd been right. November arrived in 1979 with warnings that crackled across every radio frequency in the Columbia River Gorge. The National Weather Service issued alerts I'd never heard before. Blizzard watch escalating to warning winter storm conditions expected to persist 4 to 6 days, temperatures plunging to -20 Fahrenheit, with wind chills approaching -40. Forecasters used words like unprecedented and historic and potentially deadly with the kind of certainty that made my stomach clench. I spent 3 days preparing with the methodical intensity Harold's journals had taught me. Firewood. First I split and stacked 2 full cords inside the bunker itself, filling every available corner until I could barely move without bumping into logs. The solar panels wouldn't function under heavy snow, so I charged every battery I owned, tested backup systems, filled oil lamps I'd acquired over the summer. Water containers went full, every jug, every pot, every vessel that could hold liquid got topped off from the spring chamber. Food meant opening my limited savings for canned goods, dried beans, rice, anything that wouldn't spoil and could be cooked with minimal fuel. The bunker's exterior needed attention too. I reinforced the ventilation pipes with metal brackets welded at angles that would shed snow instead of collecting it. Boarded the windows with plywood I'd been saving for exactly this kind of emergency. Checked every seal, every joint, every place where wind or moisture might infiltrate. Rex watched from the doorway, patient and knowing like he'd seen this dance before. Ruth called on the phone line I'd installed in September, her voice thinner than I remembered, breath catching between words in a way that made my chest tight. "Ethan, you need to come stay at the nursing home. Garrett can pick you up tomorrow." "I appreciate that, but I need to be here. This storm is going to be worse than anything you've handled. That's exactly why I need to stay. If Harold's design works, it works. If it doesn't, better I find out now than during the next emergency when someone might be depending on it." Silence stretched across the line, punctuated by her breathing. "You're as stubborn as he was. I learned from good teachers." Her laugh turned into a cough that lasted long enough to scare me. "Ruth, you okay?" "Fine. Just tired. Ethan, listen, if you survive this, and I believe you will, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll stay. Not just through winter, not just until something better comes along. Make this your real home. Harold built it to last generations, and you're the first generation. Accept that responsibility." The weight of what she was asking settled over me like physical pressure. 23 years old, and she wanted me to commit to forever, to anchor myself to this buried metal tube and the promise it represented. That's a big promise. The biggest ones usually are. But you've already proven you can keep them. The question is whether you believe you deserve to. I looked around the bunker at the systems I'd mastered, the improvements I'd made, the home I'd built from Harold's foundation, and my own sweat. Deserving had nothing to do with it. This place had saved me when I was drowning. The least I could do was save it back. I promise Ruth, this is home now. Forever if that's what it takes. Good. That's good. Now close everything up tight and don't do anything stupid trying to be heroic. Heroes are just people who survived long enough to tell the story. The line went dead, and I stood holding the receiver, knowing somehow that conversation mattered more than either of us had said out loud. The storm announced itself 12 hours before arrival, with a pressure drop I felt in my sinuses and joints. The sky turned the color of old iron clouds stacking in layers that looked solid enough to walk on. Wind picked up from the north, steady and building, carrying the smell of snow and distance, and something wild that made Rex pace circles around the bunker. I brought him inside and locked down everything that could be locked. Double-checked the stove installation, the chimney draw, the ventilation baffles. Made sure I had flashlights within reach, candles as backup matches stored in waterproof containers. Laid out extra blankets and the emergency supplies I'd assembled. First aid kit, rope, the flare gun I'd bought in case I needed to signal for help. Then I sat by the stove and waited for the sky to fall. It started at 2 in the afternoon with snow that seemed to materialize out of air too cold to hold moisture. Big flakes at first drifting down like hesitant scouts, then smaller and meaner, driven horizontal by wind that went from strong to violent in the span of 20 minutes. By 3 o'clock, visibility was zero beyond the bunker's reinforced windows. By 4, the wind was screaming like something alive and furious, battering the metal walls with fists of frozen air. Inside stayed calm. The temperature held at 68 degrees Fahrenheit even as the thermometer I'd mounted outside plummeted past zero and kept dropping. The stove burned steady, properly vented, Harold's design proving itself against conditions he'd anticipated 47 years ago. Solar power was gone, but the batteries held, giving me light that felt like defiance against the darkness pressing in from every direction. Rex settled by my feet, his warmth adding to the stove's heat, his presence reminding me that survival wasn't always solitary. Day 1 passed with eerie stability. The bunker flexed and groaned under wind that hit 70 miles per hour, according to the battery-powered radio, but nothing cracked, nothing failed, nothing suggested Harold had miscalculated the forces his shelter would need to withstand. I read by lamplight, checked systems every 2 hours, maintained the fire with wood that burned clean and hot. Day 2 brought heavier snow. I could hear it accumulating on the roof, not individual flakes, but a growing weight that made the metal creak in new pitches. Every 4 hours I suited up in layers, borrowed and bought and improvised, pushed open the door against drifts already waist-high, and shoveled the ventilation pipes clear. 5 minutes outside in -15 wind chill left my face raw and my lungs aching, but the alternative was suffocation, so I did it without complaint. The third day changed everything. Afternoon was dying into early dark when I heard something that didn't belong, a sound too regular to be wind, too desperate to ignore. Knocking. Someone was knocking on the bunker door. Impossible. Nobody would be out in this. Nobody could survive being out in this. The knocking came again, weaker this time, and I heard a voice barely audible over the storm's roar. "Please, kids, please." I grabbed my coat and wrenched the door open against a wall of snow and wind that tried to slam it shut again. The scene beyond looked like the end of the world. White chaos, darkness, cold so intense it felt like being punched, and huddled against the bunker's entrance, barely visible under layers of snow, were 4 people. A man and a woman, both maybe 30 faces, blue-white with cold. 2 children, boy and girl, maybe 8 and 6. Not crying because they were beyond crying, just shaking in a way that meant hypothermia was minutes away from critical. Inside. Now. They stumbled through the door and I kicked it shut behind them, the bunker's warmth hitting their frozen bodies like a slap. The woman collapsed immediately, teeth chattering so hard I thought she might crack a molar. The children just stood there, ice crusted in their hair, eyes vacant with shock. Rex barked once and started herding them toward the stove, his training kicking in with the certainty of instinct. I grabbed every blanket I had and started wrapping people, friction-rubbing arms and legs to force circulation back into extremities that had gone dangerously numb. The man tried to speak, but his jaw was shaking too badly to form words, so I just kept working. Blankets, warmth, getting them close to heat without getting them too close too fast because that could cause its own damage. 10 minutes passed before anyone could talk coherently. The woman's first voice, hoarse and cracking. "Our car. Stuck. 2 miles back. Tried to walk. Saw your ventilation pipe." Her name was Lily Ashford. The man was Garrett, no relation to Ruth's neighbor despite sharing a first name. The children were Sam, 8 years old with his father's dark hair, and Mia, 6 and small for her age. They'd been evacuating from Hood River to Portland, had ignored weather warnings because the forecast had seemed exaggerated, had paid for that arrogance with their car buried in a drift, and no choice except walk or die. "How long were you outside?" "Don't know. Hours. Sam couldn't walk anymore. I was carrying him." She started crying. Then the kind of tears that come from realizing how close death had been, how narrowly they'd missed it. "You're safe now. This place can handle 6 people and a storm. What is this place? Home. For as long as the storm lasts." The bunker became crowded in ways Harold probably never anticipated. 6 humans and 1 dog in space designed for 2 people, maximum sleeping in shifts, sharing food that needed to stretch, managing waste with a composting system that was suddenly working overtime. But the crowding brought warmth beyond what the stove provided. Sam and Mia huddled with Rex, finding comfort in fur and unconditional acceptance. Lily and Garrett stayed close to each other in that way couples do when they've just survived something that could have ended their marriage and their lives simultaneously. I cooked soup on the stove, canned chicken noodles stretched with extra water and rice, not gourmet but hot and filling. We ate from mismatched bowls and cups I'd accumulated, and nobody complained about portions or variety because we were alive and warm, while outside the storm kept trying to kill anything that moved. Sam, the 8-year-old, watched me with eyes too serious for his age. "Are you a superhero?" "No. Just someone who takes care of this place." "Why do you live in a hole?" His parents tried to shush him, but I waved them off. "It's not a hole. It's a home. Someone I never met built it because he loved his wife enough to want her protected no matter what happened. I'm just the person who keeps it working, like a guardian." Something like that. The boy thought about this, processing concepts bigger than his years should have allowed. Can anyone be a guardian if they care enough about something beyond themselves? Yeah, anyone can. Garrett spoke for the first time since he'd regained enough warmth to unclench his jaw. "Why did you let us in?" "You don't know us. We could be dangerous." "Could be. But you showed up with frozen kids in a blizzard, which means you needed help more than I needed caution. That's how it works. You help people when they need it, because someday you'll need help too." He nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "Then don't thank me. Thank Harold Brennan, who built this strong enough to shelter strangers 40 years after he died." Night 3 passed in shifts, someone always awake to feed the fire, to check on the children, to listen for sounds that might mean structural failure. The storm showed no signs of weakening. Wind speeds held steady in the 60 to 70 range, snow accumulation measured in feet rather than inches, and the temperature outside bottomed at 18 below zero, not counting wind chill. 3 in the morning on day 4, I woke to a sound that separated itself from the storm's general chaos. Sharp crack followed by groaning metal coming from the roof's eastern section where snow had been piling deepest. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed onto the workbench to examine the ceiling more closely. The metal was bowing inward, subtle but visible stress, concentrating at weld points that Harold had reinforced, but 17 years of weather had weakened. Garrett saw my expression. "How bad, bad? Snow load is too much. If that section collapses, we'll have a hole straight to the storm. What do we do?" "Someone needs to go up top and shovel the snow off before the weight becomes critical." "You can't go out there. You'll die. If I don't go, the roof caves in and we all die slower." Lily's face went white. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. This is what guardians do. They handle the things that can't wait for better options." I dressed in every layer I owned: thermal underwear, flannel shirt, wool sweater, insulated jacket, waterproof shell over that. 3 pairs of socks, inside boots I'd treated with weatherproofing compound. Gloves with hand warmers stuffed in the fingers, goggles to protect my eyes from wind-driven ice, a rope tied around my waist and secured to the bunker's main support beam because falling off the roof meant dying alone in a drift. Rex planted himself between me and the door, whining in a register I'd never heard before. "I know, boy, but if I don't do this, everyone in here is in danger. You understand that?" He whined again, but moved aside some part of his training, recognizing necessity when it showed up. The door opened onto conditions that felt like stepping into a meat locker filled with razors. Wind hit at 70+ miles per hour, driving snow so hard it felt like being sandblasted. Visibility was 0 beyond arm's length. Temperature with wind chill was somewhere around -40 and falling. I couldn't breathe. The air was too cold, too violent, too hostile to life. I pulled my scarf over my mouth and nose and forced myself to take shallow breaths that didn't freeze my lungs solid. The ladder I'd built for roof access was buried, but I knew where it should be. Dug through 3 feet of packed snow until I hit rungs, then started climbing with hands already going numb despite the gloves. Every step up the wind tried to tear me loose. The rope around my waist was the only thing keeping me tethered to survival. The roof was worse than I'd imagined, snow piled 4 feet deep, in places 5 in the drift that had formed over the eastern section. I started shoveling with movements that were more desperation than technique, heaving snow into wind that immediately redistributed it, but slowly, incrementally reducing the load on metal that was already past its tolerances. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only cold and wind and the mindless repetition of scooping and throwing hands and feet, losing feeling, face going numb, core temperature dropping toward dangerous territory. But the roof held, and that was all that mattered. Something changed. The pressure under my shovel decreased. The metal stopped groaning, and I realized I'd cleared enough to matter. The immediate crisis was over. Getting down was harder than going up. My hands wouldn't grip properly. Feet kept slipping on ice-covered rungs, and halfway to the ground, I lost my hold entirely and fell the last 8 feet into a snowdrift that cushioned the impact but buried me completely. Can't breathe. Can't see. Can't tell which way is up. The rope jerked tight, and I felt myself being pulled, dragged through snow toward something that turned out to be the bunker door. Hands grabbed my jacket and hauled me inside, where warmth felt like fire on frozen skin. Garrett and Lily were pulling me, stripping off ice-covered layers, rubbing circulation back into extremities that had gone blue-white. Rex licked my face with a tongue that seemed impossibly warm, whining continuously. The kids watched with eyes wide, Sam clutching his sister. "Is he dying?" "No, sweetheart. He's just cold. He'll be okay." But I wasn't sure. Couldn't feel my hands or feet, couldn't stop shaking, couldn't seem to get warm, even wrapped in every blanket and pressed close to the stove. Lily held me like I was one of her children, rocking slightly, murmuring reassurances I couldn't quite process. "You did it. Roof held. We're safe. Just breathe." Sensation returned in stages that hurt worse than the cold, burning needles in fingers and toes, muscles cramping from sustained, shivering jaw, aching from teeth that had been chattering for who knows how long. But everything worked. Nothing permanently damaged. Just the price of keeping people alive. Garrett knelt beside where I was bundled. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. Stupid and brave look the same until you know how it ends. It ended with us alive. That makes it brave. Dawn of day 5 brought something new. Silence. Not complete, the wind still blew and snow still fell, but the freight train roar had diminished to something almost manageable. By noon the snowfall had thinned enough to see shapes beyond the bunker, and by evening the sky was clearing in patches that showed stars for the first time in 100 hours. The storm had broken. Morning 6 emerged clear and brutally cold sun, reflecting off snow that had drifted 6 feet deep in places, sculpting the landscape into something unrecognizable. The bunker stood like an island in a frozen sea, battered but intact, warm and safe, and exactly what Harold had promised it would be. We dug our way to the surface together, creating a trench wide enough for the Ashfords to begin the trek back toward town. Their car was hopeless, buried past the windows, but Cascade Locks was manageable now that the immediate danger had passed. Lily hugged me before they left, fierce and quick. "You saved our lives. The bunker saved your lives. I just kept it working." "No. You made a choice to help strangers when turning us away would have been safer." "That's not the bunker. That's you." Sam tugged my sleeve. "I'm going to be a guardian when I grow up. Then start practicing now. Help people who need it. Take care of things that matter. That's the whole job." We walked together toward town, the Ashfords leaning on each other, Rex forging ahead through snow that came up to his chest, me following tracks that hadn't existed 5 days ago. The world looked apocalyptic. Trees down power lines, snapped buildings damaged by snow loads they hadn't been designed to handle. But people were emerging, checking on neighbors, sharing resources, doing the 1,000 small acts that keep communities alive when infrastructure fails. Cascade Locks saw me differently after that. The skepticism and caution had burned off in the storm, replaced by something closer to respect. The kid who'd shown up homeless and desperate had sheltered a family through conditions that had killed 3 people in neighboring counties. Harold's bunker had proven itself not as a relic, but as functional salvation. And I'd proven myself as someone who could be counted on when things went catastrophically wrong. Dennis Murphy, who'd once told me the bunker would collapse on my head, approached while I was helping clear snow from Cordelia's storefront. "I was wrong about you. People change their minds. No hard feelings. Not just wrong about you, wrong about what matters. You could have turned those people away, kept your supplies for yourself. But you didn't. That counts for something. Community helps community. Someone smart taught me that." Cordelia appeared in the doorway, leaning on a shovel, watching our exchange with approval. Harold would have been proud. "Ruth is proud. Hell, I'm proud and I barely know you. Just did what needed doing. That's the point, isn't it? Most people know what needs doing. You actually did it." Ruth came 3 weeks after the storm, but something was different. Garrett Sullivan drove slower than usual, and when I helped Ruth from the truck, I could feel how much lighter she'd become, how the weight had fallen from her, like she was letting go of ballast she no longer needed. She walked into the bunker with the careful steps of someone rationing their remaining strength, and when she sat in the chair I'd built, she let out a breath that sounded like relief, mixed with surrender. "Heard you became a hero." "Heard wrong. Just kept people from freezing." Garrett Ashford tells a different story. Says you risked your life to save theirs. Roof needed clearing. Someone had to do it. She studied me for a long moment, her blue eyes still sharp but holding something I hadn't seen before, not just approval, but a kind of peaceful certainty. The bunker saved them, yes, but Harold's design wouldn't have mattered without someone here willing to make it work. Someone who'd climb onto a roof in conditions that should have killed him because it was the right thing to do. The words sat between us heavier than they should have been. "Ruth, are you?" "I'm dying, Ethan. The doctors told me 3 months ago. My heart's giving out the same way Harold's did. They give me weeks now, maybe a month if I'm particularly stubborn, which I intend to be." The bunker suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. "No. You can't. I can and I am, and I've made my peace with it. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. I need you to know that everything I gave you, the bunker, Harold's tools, the ring, the trust, none of it was charity. It was investment. I invested in you because I believed you'd do exactly what you've done. You've proven me right in ways that matter more than I can say. Tears were running down my face and I didn't care. I don't want to lose you. You won't. I'll be here, in these walls, In the spring, Harold carved my name beside. In every promise you keep. Love doesn't end just because hearts stop beating. Harold taught me that. She reached into her bag, the same canvas bag she'd brought on her first visit, and pulled out a document I recognized as a property deed, legal papers with stamps and signatures. This land, this bunker, everything on it, it's yours now, legally. I had the lawyers finalize it last week. When I die, there won't be any question. You're not squatting, you're not borrowing, you're home. Ruth. Listen. Harold's dream wasn't just the bunker. It was finding someone who understood that home isn't about walls or ownership. It's about the people you shelter, the warmth you create, the love you protect. You proved that when you opened the door to the Ashfords. You became what Harold hoped someone would become. She took the ring from the toolbox, Harold's 25th anniversary gift that had never been given. One day you'll love someone the way Harold loved me. When that day comes, give them this. Tell them it represents a promise that's been kept across generations. Tell them home is what you build together, not what you buy or inherit. I can't imagine that. Can't imagine anyone wanting to share this life. You will. Trust me. The best things in life are the ones we can't imagine until they arrive. Before Garrett helped her back to the truck, Ruth stood at the bunker door one last time, looking out at the hill, the trees, the sky Harold had loved enough to build beneath. Take care of it, she whispered. Take care of yourself. And remember, you're not alone, even when you think you are. Harold and I, we're part of this place now. Part of you. I watched the truck disappear down the road, knowing with the certainty of grief that I'd never see her again. The call came on a Tuesday morning in June 1982. Garrett Sullivan's voice on the other end of the line, rough with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. Ruth passed last night, peaceful, in her sleep. She asked me to tell you she was proud of you. I stood holding the phone, unable to speak, unable to process that the woman who'd given me everything was gone. Funeral's Thursday. She wanted you to know your family. Act like it. The service was small, maybe 40 people who'd known Ruth Brennan as a woman who'd loved deeply and trusted wisely. They buried her next to Harold in the Cascade Lock Cemetery, their headstones simple granite markers that gave names and dates without flourish or pretension. I stood at the graveside with Rex pressed against my leg, holding a handful of dirt I was supposed to throw onto the casket but couldn't quite release. Cordelia stood beside me, her hand briefly touching my shoulder in the way people do when words fail. She gave you something precious. Don't waste it by dwelling on the loss. Honor it by living the way she believed you would. I scattered the dirt and walked away from the grave, knowing Ruth would expect me not to mourn forever, but to continue building, to keep the promise, to pass it forward. Life continued because promises demanded it. The bunker became home not just for me, but for the life I slowly constructed around it. I worked carpentry jobs in town, saved money, made improvements that transformed Harold's shelter into something that could sustain not just survival, but actual living. And then, summer of 1984, I met Iris Calloway. She walked into Cordelia's hardware store on a Saturday afternoon looking for wood stain, and I noticed her before she noticed me. 25 years old, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt spattered with paint from whatever project had brought her here. Cordelia saw me staring and smiled in that knowing way she had. Iris, this is Ethan. He knows more about wood than anyone in 3 counties. Ethan, this is Iris. New elementary school teacher, just moved here from Eugene. We shook hands, and I tried not to notice how her grip was firm and confident, how her smile reached her eyes in a way that suggested she actually meant it. I hear you live in the old Brennan bunker. Yes, ma'am. Going on 6 years now. That's unusual. Most people couldn't handle that much solitude. I don't see it as solitude. More like intentional living. Every system I maintain, every improvement I make, it means something. It's mine because I've earned it. She studied me for a moment, really looked at me in a way that felt like being seen rather than observed. "Show me sometime." The question surprised us both, but I nodded before I could overthink it. "Anytime." That conversation led to coffee the following week, which led to a walk around Cascade Locks, where I told her about Harold and Ruth and the promise I'd made, and she told me about growing up in Eugene, about losing her father when she was 16, about choosing teaching because she believed in building futures one student at a time. "We're both in the building business," she said, and I realized she understood in ways I hadn't expected anyone to understand. The first time I brought her to the bunker, I was nervous in ways that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with whether she'd see what I saw, not just metal and mechanisms, but the love and intention built into every system, every improvement, every promise kept. She stood in the doorway for a long time, taking it in, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "This isn't just a shelter. It's a home. I can feel the care in every detail. That's what Harold taught me. That care matters more than square footage." She turned to me, eyes serious. "Tell me about Ruth." So I did. I told her everything about meeting Ruth in the nursing home, about the letters and the tools and the ring, about Ruth's death, and the promise I'd made to pass it all forward. Iris listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she reached for my hand. "She chose well. I can see why she trusted you." We married in spring of 1985, a small ceremony at the bunker itself with Cordelia as witness, a minister who'd known both Harold and Ruth officiating. Our honeymoon was 3 days at the coast and then back home because home was where we wanted to be. Our daughter arrived in 1987, healthy and loud and perfect. We named her Ruth, and Iris cried when I suggested it because she understood what it meant to carry a name forward to honor debts that couldn't be repaid except through living well. Little Ruth grew up in the bunker, learning to work the water system before she could read, understanding that the place she called home had been built with love and maintained with promises. She left for college eventually, married a good man, gave us a granddaughter in 2008, a daughter they named Iris, completing a circle I couldn't have imagined when I was 22 and homeless. The years accumulated like snow, some seasons heavier than others, some easier to navigate, but all of them part of the same landscape Harold had helped me enter. Rex passed when I was 31, peacefully in his sleep, and we buried him on the hill above the bunker. The Rex that followed was Rex the Second, then Rex the Third, each one a border collie trained with the same care Harold had shown the first, each one understanding the bunker's secrets better than seemed possible for an animal. I worked as a carpenter, then a contractor, eventually teaching trade skills at the community college. Money came more easily than it had, but we never left the bunker. Iris understood that this wasn't about lacking options. It was about choosing meaning over convenience, stewardship over ownership. Ruth came for her last visit in the summer of 1982, and I kept every promise I made to her. 46 years in this bunker, a life built from Harold's foundation and Ruth's trust. But those years weren't linear progression. They were cycles of building and maintaining, of teaching my daughter and granddaughter what it meant to care for something beyond yourself, of proving that Harold's dream could sustain not just one desperate kid, but an entire family across generations. Which brings me to now. To Iris, my granddaughter, 16 years old, sitting in the bunker that's been home to 4 generations of care. She's asked how I ended up here, and I've told her the story. All of it. Nothing held back, because she deserves to know where she comes from and what she might choose to carry forward. When I finish, she sits quietly for a long moment, absorbing it all. Then she stands and walks to the wall where Harold's blueprint still hangs, where Ruth's letter is taped beside mine, where 4 generations of photos document the chain of love and responsibility that connects 1962 to 2024. Can I see the spring I take her underground for the first time? Rex the Fourth following us downstairs. I've reinforced but never fundamentally changed. The chamber looks the same as it did 46 years ago. The pool still feeding from the same source, the inscription, Harold carved, still readable in the lamplight. Iris reads it aloud, her voice echoing softly. For Ruth, water is life, love is eternal. H.B., 1963. To whoever finds this, the land provides for those who don't give up. She turns to me, and I can see Ruth's determination in her expression, Iris's wisdom in her eyes, something that's uniquely hers underneath it all. That's beautiful. It's true. That's better than beautiful. I kneel at the wall and pull a chisel from my pocket, the same tool Harold probably used decades ago. Below his inscription and the line I added years ago, I carve slowly, carefully, adding to the monument that connects past to future. For Iris. The promise continues, E.T. 2024. My granddaughter watches me work, understanding something I couldn't have explained when I was her age, that legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect and pass forward. When I finish, she touches the fresh letters with careful fingers. For me, for you. When I'm gone, this place is yours if you want it. The bunker, the land, the responsibility. But only if you promise what Ruth made me promise, keep it alive, use it well, pass it forward when your time comes. What if I don't want it? What if I want to do something different with my life? Then you find someone who does want it, and you choose them the way Ruth chose me. The promise isn't about staying in one place forever, it's about making sure this place never stops mattering to someone. That whoever keeps it understands what Harold and Ruth built here. She thinks about this, processing the weight and the freedom in equal measure. Did you ever regret staying every winter for the first 5 years? Every time I saw other people my age building careers in cities, having adventures I'd never have. But regret and doubt aren't the same thing. I never doubted this was right. She nods slowly, something settling in her expression. Tell me about Grandma. The real story, not just the highlights. So I do. I tell her about meeting Iris at the hardware store, about the nervousness of showing someone else this place I'd built, about the way she'd understood without needing explanation, that care and commitment mattered more than comfort. I tell her about Ruth being born, about watching my daughter grow up, understanding that home meant responsibility and blessing in equal measure. Your grandmother made this place whole in ways I couldn't do alone, I say. Harold built the structure. Ruth gave me the opportunity, but Iris, your grandmother, she made it a home that could hold more than one person's dreams. Iris. My granddaughter smiles, and I see 4 generations in that smile. I want to try. I can't promise forever right now, but I want to try understanding what this means. Can that be enough? That's exactly enough. Harold started with less, so did I. We climb back to the surface where Rex the Fourth is waiting, where the photos on the wall document not just faces but promises kept across decades, where the wood stove Harold designed still burns warm and steady. The snow is starting to fall outside, another November arriving to test what we've built. But inside we're warm and safe and connected to something larger than ourselves. I was 22 and homeless. I tell my granddaughter one more time, making sure she understands. I found a buried shelter under a hill. But what I really found was a promise to honor the people who came before, to shelter the people who come after, to build something that outlasts fear and doubt and the 1,000 reasons to give up. That's what home means. Not walls or comfort or safety, though this place provides all 3. Home means believing your life matters beyond your own survival, that care and commitment can create something worth inheriting. She sits next to me on the couch I built 20 years ago, close enough that I can feel her warmth, young enough that the future looks infinite and bright, but old enough to understand that promises have weight. I'll remember, she says quietly. When it's my turn, I'll remember everything you've taught me. Outside, the snow falls heavier, covering the hill in white, hiding the bunker the way it's been hidden for 62 years. Inside, we're warm and safe and connected to something that began before either of us was born and will continue after we're both gone. Rex settles by the fire. Iris leans against my shoulder. The metal walls creak with familiar voices. And I understand finally what Harold knew when he carved Ruth's name into stone, that love builds monuments more durable than any bomb shelter, that the land really does provide for those who don't give up, and that some promises are worth keeping forever, even when forever is measured in generations rather than years. The bunker has been home to 4 generations now. 5 if you count Harold. And the promise continues, passed from hand to hand like a flame that doesn't diminish with sharing, but only grows brighter. That's enough. That's everything.